Hey, everybody. Good morning. It's Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin. It's the 2nd of October, 2019. Okay, I just want to let you all know that there were like 100 questions on the question feed this morning, which is a lot. I have whittled it down to about 12. I know that there is an awful lot going on right now, and I want to be very mindful of the fact that we have an enormous amount to cover right now. To me, we've got to, at this moment in time, one of the really key issues of where we find ourselves is focus. I want to make a couple of things very clear. The real focus of where we are right now is in this impeachment investigation, and it's profoundly important that that is where the focus of all of us stay. There's lots of other issues happening around on the edges here, but the impeachment investigation at this moment and the push toward impeachment is really a key chunk of where we find ourselves. So I'm going to answer the questions that are relevant as of this moment in time to the impeachment inquiry. And some of the other lesser questions, so to speak, that relate to other issues, I'm going to leave to the side. I, of course, will follow up with these as much as I can over the next few days. But please understand that with the volume of breaking news that we have right now and nearly 100 questions on the questions feed, I can't get to everything or we'd be here for like hours and I would never get any work done. Okay. So, oh my goodness, let's just start here. We had a mountain of breaking news late yesterday and overnight that relates to the ongoing issues with regard to Ukraine and the president's vendettas. So one of the bits of breaking news that we learned this morning is that the president, the day after the call with Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, called Boris Johnson and asked him for help in investigating the United States intelligence agencies. And also, apparently, Bill Barr had meetings in London where he raised questions about the reliability of UK intelligence. The whole reason why this is happening is because of the Steele dossier. We already knew Great Britain was involved to some extent. We did not know until this morning that there was an actual phone call with Boris Johnson the day after the Zelensky call. So this leads me to one question that was asked today, which is this. Somebody said, are we ever going to know about the transcripts that are on that secret server? I just want you all to know that like all of this breaking news is coming off the secret server. So, I said on Twitter 2 days ago, I think it was like on Sunday night or Monday morning that, one of the things that's very clear here is that someone has access to the transcripts that are on that server and they are leaking them to the press. Because from where we are right now, we now know about a multitude of other phone calls that we did not know about at the time that the Zelensky call initially broke 10 days ago or so. And the flood of what we are getting is coming from people who are leaking inside the White House and inside the intelligence agencies and inside state. So we do not need to worry. I'm just going to say this. We don't need to worry about never seeing the contents of the secret server. We're seeing them in real time right now. In fact, like the reporting this morning on this call with Boris Johnson said that this transcript was one of the ones that was on the secret server. I don't want anybody to be worried about the idea that the secret server is never going to see the light of day. They may very well be trying to destroy it. I don't want to kind of like negate the fact that they could be engaged in an effort to destroy evidence. Indeed, we have indications that they very well might be. But someone inside the intelligence agencies or the White House has those transcripts and they are being leaked out to the press drip by drip by drip by drip by drip. Okay. So from that standpoint, that's one bit of breaking news. We also learned yesterday that Bill Barr went to Italy to listen to a copy of the deposition of Joseph Massoud, who you may remember is the person who spoke to George Papadopoulos. George Papadopoulos then gets drunk and talks to an Australian intelligence agent. That person is the person who initially alerts the DOJ in the form of the FBI to the fact that there may be compromised behavior, activity, people within the Trump campaign. So one of the things that we now know is that Bill Barr is running all over the world in furtherance of the president's desire to undermine the contents of the Mueller report. Now, why would he do this? Okay, so this is like a really important issue here. Like I know the flippant response to this right now on Twitter is, I thought the president said he was fully exonerated. Well, there's a bigger thing at issue than just that. If the president is able to get our government to conclude that the initial report that came out in January of 2017, right before he got inaugurated, that Russia had interfered in the election, if he can get our intelligence agencies to admit that is false or reach some conclusion that undermines that report, what's the next thing he's allowed to do? Lift sanctions on Russia. So there is very clearly a much larger agenda at play here than just trying to make the president feel better and to get his pound of flesh. And again, this has to raise questions about the allegiance of this president, whether it's to the United States or whether it's to Vladimir Putin, who, by the way, this morning laughed at a conference in Russia when asked about whether or not he intended to interfere in the 2020 US election. Already happening. No defenses up inside the United States. If we need a reason to impeach, that one right there is one of the ones that's at the top of my list. So, let's just remember that this news, as it has been breaking over and over again, is still further in real time evidence of impeachable offenses. All right, we have a couple of other things that have broken in the last 24 hours that are very significant. The first is that the Office of the Inspector General, in fact, the Inspector General of the Department of State, contacted, apparently, a number of the House committees yesterday afternoon asking for an urgent meeting that is taking place today. That reach out came very shortly after Pompeo, as the Secretary of State, wrote a letter back to the intelligence committees, saying, the House Intel Oversight and Ways and Means, saying that he did not intend to comply with their subpoenas. We talked about this a little bit yesterday on the broadcast. There was some notification going on there that Pompeo said that his people might have needed more time, and that he wasn't going to he was going to instruct them not to comply. He was going to instruct witnesses not to show up. Immediately after that, the Office of the Inspector General of State reaches out to those same committees. Why? Well, we don't know the details of it yet, but there was some breaking news yesterday afternoon, evening on Twitter to the effect that Pompeo may have asked the Office of General Counsel to opine on whether or not he could discipline employees at state if they disobeyed his orders to evade subpoenas and to avoid testifying in front of House committees. That, by the way, is illegal. That's the other thing I just want to add here. It's illegal. If he is ordering people to destroy evidence, if he is ordering staff to not comply, that's obstruction of justice. And then the effort to fire people for not breaking the law, for evading his orders, so to speak, is also illegal. So it may very well be that what we are seeing from the OIG, now again, we don't know this. We will have to kind of see what develops out of these meetings that are being held today. My suspicion is that there is either evidence that Pompeo has ordered people to destroy evidence, or that he has inquired, as this leak seems to suggest, about whether or not he can fire or discipline the law, as he's to do. And either one of those, from the perspective of where we sit right now, is profoundly disturbing. This is the reason why Schiff and his colleagues wrote a letter back to Pompeo yesterday saying, 1, you're a fact witness to Pompeo. You must recuse yourself from this. 2, ordering people not to comply is illegal. And 3, if you fail to turn over the documents or the people that we've asked for, we're going to take that as evidence, which they are legally allowed to do, by the way, of obstruction of justice. And we're going to assume that everything that you are not giving us is proof of the president's crimes. So we have layers upon layers upon layers now of illegality. And we don't know the details of what the OIG is going to say in these meetings, as I said, but my suspicions are that it's either orders for destruction of evidence or orders for employees not to comply with the threat of employment termination or other sanctions, both of which are illegal, both of which are obstruction of justice, and both of which would be urgent and pressing concerns to bring to these committees. By the way, this is also evidence that's worthy of getting Pompeo impeached, if it's in fact correct. So that is my expectation of what's happening today on the Hill. And, again, not small. The third big story that broke this morning, by the way, is that Pompeo finally confirmed that he was in fact on the call with Zelensky. He's lied about this in the past. The president hung him out to dry and let him lie about it. The fact that he has now confirmed it does in fact make him a fact witness. It does mean that he is not in charge and should not be in charge of anything related to document or witness production related to this out of state, meaning out of the State Department. And fundamentally, it leads to the point of Pompeo's impeachment as well as the president's. So that there's a lot of moving parts around this today with regard to what's happening with Pompeo and state. But all that said, it appears to be very quickly mounting evidence of this criminal conspiracy to bargain with Ukraine about whether or not they're going to dig up false dirt on Biden, because he's already been investigated multiple times. There's no truth to any of this. I feel like I have to keep repeating that because some of you are still watching conservative news sources, and is leading in the direction of very rapid impeachment. All right, so that's where we are in the breaking news since yesterday on that front. Now, let me say a couple of other things about this. We had Pelosi's news conference this morning with Schiff, which is started out not in a direction that I liked and ended up with Pelosi kind of like, holding Trump's feet to the fire. My one concern about this at this moment is that this press conference felt to me this morning like a little bit more of a dragging out of this process. And, I think everybody can understand at this point that given that literally Barr last week was in Europe trying to negotiate, to find evidence, to undermine the U.S. intelligence on Trump, is a sign of how quickly we need to move on this, how quickly we need to move to get this president out of office, because they're not going to stop. And by the way, this is something Pompeo said in this press conference in Rome this morning. He said, we're going to continue to root out corruption, notwithstanding this noise. They have no intention of stopping any of this. Like, they're criming right out in the open. And so, there is an urgent need at this point for articles of impeachment to be filed and for impeachment to proceed. And my hope is that Pelosi doesn't slow it down, right? That Schiff doesn't slow it down. It's incredibly important that this continue to move at a rapid pace at this point. All right. One of you asked a question about whether or not it's possible that Pelosi is negotiating with McConnell behind the scenes. It's possible. I don't really see it having that much to do with how this whole thing ends up, frankly. But if McConnell, as we discussed yesterday, is part of the front lines of potentially negotiating a resignation, Pelosi could be a part of leveraging pressure on that. And there are a lot of conversations that happen on the Hill, believe me, that never make it out to the press, that are had in the elevators and in people's offices and behind closed doors and in the coat closet. So I don't want to say never on that front. Do I think that, there's a need right now to continue ramping up pressure on this process entirely from every direction? Absolutely. And, I think we'll know at some point, it might not be until 20 years from now when there's documentaries written about all of this, whether or not Pelosi and McConnell are actually negotiating at this moment in time. It's pure speculation on my part. But like I said, it wouldn't surprise me. All right. The other bit of breaking news that we had this morning is that Adam Schiff and his fellows, the other committee heads, informed the White House that if they do not comply with turning over documents related to this call with Ukraine by Friday, they will all be subpoenaed. Is that this is all now moving at a much more rapid pace than it has moved in the past. And I take that as a very good sign. I want it moving very quickly. I like the fact that it's Wednesday now and we're going to see subpoenas by Friday in front of this, the White House, which brings us to the point of compliance, because, we've talked a lot about compliance on this broadcast. I want to remind you all that the House has inherent contempt power. And because of the acceleration of this, and this is one reason why we absolutely must keep making our phone calls, because of the acceleration of this, it seems to me more likely now than ever that we will see this House, particularly Adam Schiff's committee, use the inherent contempt power if there is an evasion of these subpoenas. So what does the inherent contempt power mean? It means fines, and it does mean that they can send the sergeant of arms to arrest somebody and throw them in the congressional jail. We have not seen them use that power yet. I hope they will use it, frankly. There's plenty of historical precedent for that being done, including, instances in the past, albeit, like a long time ago, we're talking decades, but where the sergeant of arms was literally sent into other states to bring witnesses back to testify in front of Congress. So, they have the ability to do it. I hope they do it. I don't want to see another long drawn out court proceeding here where we're litigating about the validity of subpoenas in the DC District Court. I would much prefer to have us like, literally hold these people to the fire because they're ongoing in their crime spree and they need to be stopped. And honestly, the evasion of subpoenas at this point has happened so many times that there is no reason to not invoke the inherent contempt power to continue to move this process forward. We can't afford any longer for our national security, for the sake of the stability of our democracy, for the 2020 election, to wait any longer for these subpoenas to be enforced. All right. We already talked about the involvement of Boris Johnson. I just want to flag there's a shitstorm going on about Brexit right now as well. New plan for various versions of borders with Northern Ireland coming out today that are just like, I just want to warn you all, like the prospect of global economic meltdown is real. The Dow is down by 500 points already this morning. The trade war is taking its toll. The president is not in good economic shape, leaving aside all of this impeachment stuff. And it's worthwhile staying informed about what's happening on the international front as well as what's happening here because it's related. This is all part of Putin's grand plan, like Brexit and Trump. All right. Oh boy. I had a request to talk about what the 2020 election looks like if Trump isn't in office. So let me just say this. I've mentioned this a few times on the broadcast over the last week. It's going to be a landslide if it's Pence. I don't think anybody has any doubt about that. He's not a great campaigner. He's not a compelling, politician. The likelihood of us being able to just slam that into the ground is kind of a no-brainer, right? I did say earlier this week, I'll say it again, I think there's an important piece here from the standpoint of Democratic campaigning to the effect that the more that we talk about the idea of President Pence, the more it's going to get under Trump's skin, which is going to cause a more rapid meltdown, which leads to faster impeachment. But all that said, I am not really concerned about the prospect of the 2020 election once Trump is out of office. That to me is a much lesser issue than the importance of forcing impeachment right now and making sure that the pressure is on so heavily that the Republicans have no choice but to leave the ship as it sinks. So we have a lot more we can say about that between now and next November. But let me just say this. I'm not worried about the 2020 election if Trump is impeached. I'm really not. Okay. We did have this horrific story come out yesterday about the suggestions that Trump had made to deal with the border in the past, which includes this moat filled with alligators and snakes, which they actually apparently did a cost estimate on, in case you're wondering whether or not people are taking his fascism seriously. And also this suggestion that migrants just be shot in the leg to slow them down. As Malcolm Nance and others have pointed out in the last 24 hours, giving border agents permission to fire on migrants is fundamentally state-sanctioned murder because somebody's going to get shot in a way that actually kills them. So the thing I just want to remind you all here is that while everything that is happening on impeachment around the national stage is very serious, and it is the thing that is likely to get the president impeached, his violence, his hatred, his racism, and his xenophobia should have brought us here months ago. And I'm frankly quite disappointed at this point that where we find ourselves on all of this is that that story is a secondary story to where we are. Enough ago. It was enough 2 years ago, frankly. So let's just not forget that, in the midst of all of these massive abuses of power and crimes related to Ukraine and everything else, there's also crimes against humanity related to human detention and immigration policies that are literally killing people in real time right now. Like women, as we talked about yesterday, have been moved out of the Carnes facility who have been denied cancer treatment for months. They are diagnosed with cancer and are being denied chemotherapy. So, we have a lot more to move on here than just what's happening in Ukraine. Now, one of the things that I was asked to do today, and I just want to make this all really clear because this is an important question, but not for the reason that the person who asked it thought it was. I was asked to enumerate all the many crimes that could be alleged against the president for purposes of impeachment. So I want to make something really clear here. The president can be impeached not just for crimes. And the list of crimes that the president at this point has perpetrated, since his inauguration, is so long that it would take me a day to sit here and explain all of them, including all the elements of how they've been met. Again, I want to remind you all, as I've said since the inauguration, impeachment is a political as well as a legal process. It is not just a legal process. It is also a political process. And that's part of what we're seeing in Pelosi is the choice of what to pursue. And in Schiff, the choice of what to pursue. It doesn't negate the fact that the president has engaged in a whole swath of other crimes. But even that is not the full scope of what can be considered impeachable conduct. Abuse of power, right, which might not be considered to be a crime if the president was prosecuted for it in federal court, is an impeachable offense. And we know that, by the way, because one of the impeachable offenses under which Nixon was subject to impeachment that he would have been hit with had he not resigned was his attempt to take over the impeachment process to decide what evidence was relevant to it, rather than allowing the Congress to do their designated duty in the form of our separation of powers, well-documented 3 branches of government setup. So, the thing to remember here is, like, while it is very important to remember that the president has committed a whole swath of crimes, and any number of those crimes could be the basis of an article of impeachment, those alone are not the full range of what could get him removed from office. And so, again, impeachment is not just a legal process, it's also political. And there are very strategic decisions being made right now about how to handle the conduct of the president in relation to impeachment. Again, very important to remember that the scope of this has to be strategic as well as legal. And at the moment, notwithstanding where we are, Ukraine is the easiest thing for the American population to understand in the form of an impeachable offense, right? Like, he tried to auction off military aid in exchange for throwing the 2020 election. That's a good one to try to, bring it home. So, we got a full range of scope of conduct here. And the other thing I want to remind you all, please, if you did not watch yesterday's broadcast about the issue of, potential pardons or potential immunity, please go watch it, because I talked ad nauseum about the fact that there's no way he's going to get away with all this shit. All right. The president does have a press conference scheduled today at 2 p.m. Eastern. That is part of his meetings with the president of Finland. We don't know what he's going to say. All I will say about that is hold on your hats, because my bet is it's going to be kind of like, off the rails. But that has been scheduled since yesterday. And I expect we'll hear a lot more insanity coming out of that. All right. Okay. We had a question about whether or not a RICO claim could be brought against the entire cabinet. The answer to that is no. I'm just going to remind you all that those of you who maybe are newer to the broadcast, we've done a lot of past broadcasts on RICO and how hard it is to prove, as well as the issue of proving predicate crimes to prove a total RICO offense. I used to litigate civil RICO cases. I did quite a number of them when I was practicing. They are among the hardest claims to prove. There are much easier ways to remove people from this cabinet and to remove the president than from alleging a RICO offense. So I've never been in favor of that strategically from a legal standpoint. And I don't think it's the answer here. I know it's very sexy to talk about RICO because it involves organized crime most of the time when it's alleged in a criminal context. It's not the way out of any of this. All right. Final question for today was, what do we do going forward? Which is a very good question. Like, how do we handle this going forward? Well, let me just say something that I said on Twitter that it feels real. It is going to get very insane between now and the end of this. And what I mean by that is that we are at a pace right now where we are literally there were 3 major breaking news stories related to impeachment that in any other environment would have taken down the president before 6 a.m. Pacific this morning. Like, when my alarm went off at 5:30, my inbox was full. That, by the way, is a good thing from the standpoint of the pressure that is being put on this president and anybody who's engaged in the process of impeachment, including those who are still continuing to defend him. Do I expect that this is going to be an easy ride for any one of us who's living in this country right now? No, I don't. And my bet at this moment in time is that, as we've talked about, for almost 3 years now on this broadcast, the extinction bursts now from this president are going to be fast and furious. They're going to be ugly. And the news that is going to break around all of this is going to continue to turn our stomachs and if not get worse, right? Like, I'll remind you all, today's the 1-year anniversary of the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. We still do not have the readouts that were put on the secret server about the president's conversations with MBS around that time, let alone the conversations that Jared Kushner may have had. So I do not expect any of this to get any easier. And it is another reason why, if you are having stress responses, like I'm seeing somebody over here say hives, please take a break. Because the other thing to remember here is that it's not like any of this is going to stop while you're gone. It's also not like you're not going to be able to catch up. And it is, the pace of this right now is foul. The information that we are learning is really like, about the depths, as Nancy Pelosi put it this morning, the depths of the souls of these people is evil. There's like no other way to put it, right? Like the things that we're learning about the things that they've considered and the things that they've already done are, about as amoral as it can get when you talk about like shooting people who are fleeing to safety. The levels of this are going to get worse. And, I would be negligent if I sat here and told you it's all going to get better. I've been saying since the inauguration, none of it stops until he's gone. And in the denouement of this, his insanity, his disorders, his decompensation, his rapid mental decline is going to make it a really rough ride. So we all need to be prepared. And this is one of the reasons why I've been talking about your activist self-plan for the last, 2 weeks. Make it. And then, this is the other thing. Know that your action is a part of what will help you get through it. So take action and then take a break, or take a break and then get back to your phone calls, because the people who are engaged in this need to hear from us. They need to hear from us multiple times a day right now. They need to hear from us as often as we can make it happen. Whew. All right, that's it for today. Happy hump day. I will talk to all of you tomorrow. Hang in there, people. All right, bye.